Alrighty, welcome back to the next video series in this session playthrough with Andrew Harding. Alright, so it is I, the Flying Pig, aka Diego, here to talk to you about the rules I am going to use for this gameplay session. So if you see my last video, I gave a sense as to the kind of design loophole in in Europe and Gulf. And to quickly summarize what it was, we basically have Germany that was able to steamroll the Soviet Union. And often, if it didn't lead to a decisive German victory, it could often lead to an operational German victory. So as mentioned before, a lot of the additional rules that the developers had introduced, the 13.5 rules, again, link is in the description for the forum where you can find that, were rules designed to slow down Germany. And so the rules I am also going to be using, and some of the new rules I'm going to introduce, are intended to be rules that will slow down Germany as well, but also rules that are experimenting with a few extra concepts. And at the end of the day, we want to have a fun game. We don't want to have a super boring game, but we want to have a really detailed game. Again, the goal here is to play Europe and Golf to the fullest. So we're going to play with all the rules that are in the rule books, plus a few more. So here we are. Here is my simple text file that has all the rules, and I will start to get into the rules. We have all of the 13 rules, including 13.51 to 13.53. And these three rules that you see here, 13.51 to 13.53, are the rules introduced by Rick Young to slow down Germany. And I won't go into the actual names of the rules themselves, but I can give you a quick overview about what the rules are about. They include one rule, which basically is known as the guns and butter rule. It slows down Germany's industry between the Battle of France and the invasion of the Soviet Union. And that's likely to reflect the fact that Germany's economy was in a bit of a state of decline after conquering so much territory so quickly. Even though Germany in the 1930s was the most advanced power in Europe, the same cannot necessarily be said for the rest of Europe. So in an effort for the Third Reich to actually create a powerful empire, they effectively needed to invest more resources into the areas that they conquered, whether it was parts of France, but better examples include areas like Yugoslavia, Greece. There was a lot of areas in Europe that lacked infrastructure, that lacked the proper industries to actually produce the war materials that the Third Reich needed. So in a way, I believe the guns and butter rule is a reflection of that. Germany's industry is actually going to go in a state of decline because basically Germany had to divert more of its industry and more of its economy to the civilian sector than actually to the military sector. And one common theme, if you start to study more about World War II and you start to study more about Nazi Germany, is that you learn that Nazi Germany was a country that often was competing resources among two different economies. You basically have the civilian economy, and then you have the military one. And the military one demanded a lot of manpower, demanded a lot of fuel, demanded a lot of industry. Ultimately, it took away from the civilian sector, and ultimately, trying to sustain both was nearly impossible. And it was in large part for why the Nazi regime was constantly accelerating for war, believing that if they could just conquer more territory or defeat more enemies, they can then begin to take away resources from those parts of Europe as well. But it's really clear if you start to study more about World War II that you start to realize just how much Germany, the Nazi government, was what I like to call cannibalizing Europe's economy. They basically didn't have enough resources for all of Europe, so they basically prioritized their resources for themselves. And in the process, a lot of people would suffer. And there was a lot of inefficiencies, there was a lot of corruption in these systems, so much in fact that a lot of times the Nazi administration would often get in its own way when it came to managing resources. And so you hear stories about how the Nazi rocket program, for example, the V1, V2, and V3 rocket programs were actually being built with slave labor. And you would think that for such a specialized form of industry, that you would want to have specialized personnel, specialized skilled craftsmen working on such an advanced technology. But the reality for Nazi Germany was that they didn't have those personnel available, and they decided to turn to their slave labor and basically knock out two birds with one stone, remove the people of Europe that they disliked by working them to death, while at the same time creating their weapons of war. And the end result was one that was pretty complicated. It had mixed results, as you could imagine. So that's a bit of a rant on just some historical background, but I believe the Guns and Butter rule is talking about that a little bit. There's two other rules, though. There's also a force pool reduction rule. I believe this is to reflect Germany's limited manpower, but effectively, a lot of Germany's advanced infantry, the four-step cadre strength German infantry. I don't know why I said cadre. I simply meant to say the four-step German infantry. A lot of them are going to be removed from the German force pool, and a lot of the three-step German infantry are going to be removed from the German force pool as well, and they're not available until 1942. This basically means that for Operation Barbarossa, Germany will not be able to amass their entire force pool for the assault on the Soviet Union. So in essence, Operation Barbarossa is going to be a little bit weaker than what it could potentially be otherwise. The third rule is that Italy has no production until Italy declares war on the Allies. Specifically, it declares war on Britain, given that when Italy joins the war in Europe and Gulf, France is already knocked out from the war. So this also affects Italy quite a bit because Italy loses a lot of resources when it's neutral throughout early 1939 and early 1940. So basically, you end up with a situation where Germany is going to have to divert more resources to Italy if they want to have a stronger Italian presence when Italy joins the war. So the idea here is to reduce Germany's economy effectively and also reduce Germany's manpower. And the rules seem to be pretty effective. But even then, playing with these rules, it's still very possible for Germany to have the steamroll assault against the Soviet Union. So that's something to keep in mind. But let's move on to the other rules. There's going to be the 14.2 special action increase and decrease rules. These rules are really excellent because they basically, instead of having the special actions either be removed or added based on the calendar, they're instead based on events. And so there's more skill involved. There's strategies that Germany can do to deny the Soviet Union any extra special actions. And in order for the Soviet Union, for example, to gain their extra special actions, they're going to have to attack Germany sooner or later. And same goes for the United States as well. So some great rules there. Then we have the 14.3 optional political rules. These rules are excellent political rules. They definitely open up the sandbox of political events in the game, especially for the 1939 scenario. My personal favorite is the potential for Yugoslavia to join the Axis. I always love when Yugoslavia joins the Axis. Basically, the Axis get a massive pool of manpower that they can use against Greece. 2 thumbs up for that rule. I'm going to keep moving because I don't want to spend too much time on talking too long. Don't want this video to be too long. And I think already it is going to be a little long, but that's all right. I'm going to make it one video just to keep it all in one sweet package. We have the 14.4 miscellaneous optional rules. I definitely encourage these rules because they are just really awesome. But there's 2 rules that I once was familiar with, but I was never able to find them again. But I believe you can actually find them in the forum under the Europe Engulfed zip file created by Francisco Colmenares. And for some reason, the zip file, I tried it today, it didn't open up. It was all blank. So maybe the zip file needs an update. But there's 3 particular rules that are interesting in that bunch of rules that you cannot find anywhere else. But basically, they're the upgrade fighter escort and upgrade bomber site rules, as well as a finite Soviet heavy fortress. And I will get into these rules real soon. The upgrade fighter escort rule and upgrade bomber site rule basically allows the fighters to, the allied fighters specifically, to upgrade based on, again, on events rather than the calendar, and same for the bomber sites. And basically, the allies need to shoot down 10 German fighter points in order for the fighters, for their own fighters to upgrade, while the bombers, if they want to become heavy bombers, they need to score 10 hits on Germany's industry. So again, there is more sandbox, more possibilities here. Then there's the finite Soviet heavy fortress rule. Again, that is not what these rules are called. I wasn't able to find the rules. I'm really lucky that I basically have the rules memorized. But basically, the Soviet heavy fortresses can only last 3 rounds of combat rather than an infinite round of combat that you normally would get in the default game. And the way you do it is you have the Soviet heavy fortress for the first round of combat. For the second round of combat, you grab a regular fortified area, you place it on top, or rather place it underneath, my mistake, for the second round of combat. And then for the final round of combat, you actually place the fortified area on top, and you basically end up with a regular fortified area. So obviously, these are going to have some bigger implications to the battles, like the Battle of Moscow and the Battle of Stalingrad in most game scenarios. And so that pretty much sums up all the default rules to the game. And I think I will stop the video here just to keep everything pretty short and sweet, even though I said I would push on through and actually move on and make another video for the actual custom rules that I've created.